What's up, guys? Today we're going to be going over the top 3 ways you should manage school and business. Let's jump into it. Alright guys, so one of my main philosophies in life is not only to do just hard work, but smart work. Now this means actually knowing what you're going to be going through, knowing sort of I would say like the terms and conditions of whatever you're going through. So in school, an example would be knowing your syllabus and knowing your grading structure. Now what I mean by this is usually, especially if you're in college, but this applies to if you're in high school as well, but usually your professor or teacher will give you some sort of syllabus or grading requirements in the beginning of the semester. A lot of you guys might just ignore that. You might glance it over once or twice and not really remember to think about it. What I would highly recommend is, even right now, if it's, at the time of recording this is April, even if you're later in the semester, don't neglect that, because it's one of the most important things in helping you sort of manage your time and allocate the correct amount of time to each specific task in each class. And what I mean by this is, like, say for example your class is very, very test heavy, then obviously, like, say for example like your tests are 70% of your grade, then obviously you would want to spend roughly 70-ish% of your time devoted to studying or doing any sort of classwork for that class, to studying for tests, right? If homework's only 10% of your grade, don't waste your time on that. Don't, obviously do your best on it, but don't waste like 50% of your time doing the homework if it's not worth as much to you. Because at the end of the day, like, it's all a numbers game, even with things like grades, right? So you have to remember that, like, it's okay if you don't spend like a ton of time on homework, if it's only worth like 10%, for example. If tests are worth like the rest of the grade, or if projects are worth the rest of the grade, or speeches, or whatever you're doing, right? Then obviously allocate more time to that. This is a very, very basic principle. It should be common sense, but it's surprising how so many people even forget to take this strategy. So what I would encourage you to do is, today, if you still have that syllabus, or if you lost it, then by all means, like, try to get it as soon as possible. Email your teacher, or like talk to them in class or anything like that. Just try to get your syllabus one way or another. Take a look at it for like 5 to 10 minutes. Write down, around how much time a week you plan on spending on each part, and then see if that matches up. To the percentage of the grade that part correlates to, right? So that's tip number 1. Very, very important. Don't neglect that. It may seem, again, like I said, it may seem super simple, but that's actually what's going to separate you from the rest of the pack and actually help you get those good grades, even if you're doing something like business on the side. All right, so the number 2 tip that I want to give you guys is knowing your schedule and knowing how to structure anything related to business and academics. And what I mean by this is, like, say for example your business venture is like me, you're doing something like a marketing agency. And for me personally right now, I know that sales are the most important part of my business, which means I have to actively focus on doing outreach and doing things like cold calls, emails, DM outreach, messenger outreach, LinkedIn, going to networking events, all that stuff, right? And since that's the most important part for me, most of that selling is going to take up time during the day, right? Which completely makes sense, because there's an old saying, I think it was Mark Cuban, and a few people have brought this up, right? You're supposed to sell when your clients or your customers are awake, and sharpen your sword when they're asleep, right? And what that means is, like, basically you practice your skills, lead source, do whatever you need to prepare for those outreaches during the night, right? Or it could be like preparing to get your clients' results, right? That's another example. Doing all the behind the scenes work at night, and then actually selling during the day. And why this is probably relatable to many of you is because maybe a lot of you, like, maybe for even something like e-commerce, or doing something, any sort of business model, right? You always want to be selling when your clients or the bulk of your potential customers or clients are awake, because obviously they're not going to respond as quickly when they're asleep. It might get lost, in the tons of emails or tons of calls that they get. They just don't have the time to respond, and they're not in the position to respond when they're asleep. But when they're awake, when they're at work, they might be doing some stuff on the side as well. But for the most part, at least they're aware, and at least that's the most opportune time to reach out to them. So what this means in terms of like planning out your academics. For me personally, an example is like on Monday, say for example on Monday I have classes from 1 to around 6 o'clock, like 5:40-ish, right? That time is blocked out. I can't control that, right? Because those are my class times. But what I can control is when I actually do sell. It doesn't make sense for me to actually hit up businesses during the evening, when a lot of them are just like relaxing with family or asleep or, doing whatever they want to do. Should I DM them? Should I message them like late at night? Probably not, right? Because that's not the most opportune time that you can get instant response. But during the day, yeah, of course, they're at work, maybe they're on their lunch break or something like that, or maybe talking to one of their coworkers. Or, like the best opportunity is like if they're just doing like super, super light work and they were expecting like some sort of calls anyway, then obviously, yeah, that's the best time. And how do you structure around that? Well, of course, for me, I'm going to do my outreaches like late morning, so around the 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock hours when I don't have class, right? And then in the evening, that's when I leave like a block of time, 2 to 3 hours to actually get my schoolwork done and to get my studying done, right? Does that make the most sense for me? Yeah, of course. Like that's the completely like the best schedule that I can have. I'm not gonna sell like super early in the morning because obviously a lot of clients aren't gonna be at the office, but it's still morning, right? So with schoolwork, with studying and stuff like that, usually there's no like time restriction on it. I know there's like a few exceptions. If you have to study for like a huge test and you have like other things to do during the day, then I guess there would be some sort of restriction there. But for me personally, like I could study any time of the day and there's not really a restriction on it. I'm not constrained to only studying in the morning, for example. Like, unless I procrastinated and I have to get it done before classes, right? And then same thing with like days like Tuesdays and Thursdays. I actually have class very, very early in the morning. So I got class from 8 to 9:25, and then from 11 to 12-ish, that's another class. So basically the time in between my classes, usually I just do some very, very light work because it's not enough for me to get in like a super, super deep work state. And that's, usually like responding to emails, DMs, maybe reaching out to a few clients, but not really to the point where like I'm in a solid work state. So I don't really count that work block. It's just for me to like take a breather in between classes. So for me, it's like basically from 8 to noon is actually my entire class time, right? Maybe I'll like grab something to eat or something like that because I don't really consider that work block in between like a solid work block. So what I do instead is actually reach out to my clients in the afternoon, right? So I'll maybe prepare like from 1 to maybe like 2, 3, 4-ish. That's like a general like work block for me to actually reach out to clients. Anytime after that is going to be devoted to like either school, spending time with family, lead sourcing, behind the scenes stuff. Like that's basically my Tuesday and Thursday schedule just because I have classes very early in the morning. So then obviously I'll push back everything towards later in the day. But that makes sense, right? Same idea, same principle here. Just know exactly when you need to do the task. Doesn't make sense, for example, on Tuesday for me to get up super, super, super early and like do just the most random stuff. I'm not gonna get into like a deep work state. Like it doesn't make sense because even if I get up at 5:30, maybe I start work at 6 o'clock or something like that. Like 30 minutes to get ready, meditate, do my journals, affirmations, everything like that, right? Doesn't make sense for me to go from 6 to like 7:30, only like an hour and a half work block, and then I have to drive to school, get ready and stuff like that. Not really, Plus, like I wouldn't even be getting super like productive stuff done anyway because I can't be reaching out to clients. Maybe I'll do some lead sourcing, but just doesn't really make sense. So find out, what's the best scheduling for you to get actually solid work blocks in while not like disturbing like all the other tasks you need to do, and also obviously take into account whether or not your specific task has a time restriction. If it does, then prioritize it first. For example, with classes, I can't really control that, so I'm going to prioritize it in front of like schoolwork. Same thing with like same thing with like reaching out to businesses. It's constrained from like 9 to 5 usually, so that's going to go in also with priority. And then later comes the planning of like when I actually do my homework, because that's not really that important because I can do it anytime during the day, right? So that's another thing to take into consideration. And my third and final tip is actually getting all the hard stuff done first. And like I said, this might be super, super general advice for you, but I would highly recommend it simply because like even look at the analogy, say for example, like you're a competitive athlete or you're a competitive power lifter. Say that's your example. Do you see competitive powerlifters doing like hypertrophy exercises first, or like a competitive athlete doing like, they'll warm up a little bit, right? But eventually, like maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes of warm up, they jump straight into like the hardest sets or the hardest sort of exercise, right? It's because they have the most stamina at first and because they have the most discipline at first. If you try to do like the easiest task and it slowly incrementally gets harder, you're gonna lose motivation first of all, right? You're not gonna be as inclined to keep going on. You're not gonna be in that deep state of focus simply because you don't have the incentive, more of the incentive, right? If it slowly slopes up like that, first of all, your stamina is going down already, right? So you're not even feeling that like into it anymore. You're not even like in such a productive state anymore. And progressively, like you'd expect it to get easier as you go on, but it's actually going the opposite direction. So you just get distracted super easily. That's not what you want to do. Maybe you want to do like 10-15 minutes of warm up first. Maybe get like one easy task done first, and then immediately move on to the hardest project or like subject to study for, or like homework assignment, anything along those lines. And then slowly progress it down to like order of like difficulty, right? So by the end of your work session, you're literally cruising on like the easiest work, and you're gonna get the feeling of satisfaction. And even though like objectively, yes, the work towards the tail end is like much easier, you're still gonna feel like in your mind, you're still gonna feel like much more accomplished simply because you crushed the hardest task and you no longer have that lingering sense of like restlessness or procrastination. Okay, so those are my top 3 tips for managing school and business. Definitely like in the future, I'm gonna do a more in-depth video on this, but for now, these are probably like my best 3 tips I can give you guys. I know I've been getting a lot of requests for videos like this, so if you guys have any other suggestions, especially on like this topic, how to manage school and business, let me know. If you have like more specific suggestions, for example, like how to prepare for tests and things of that nature, then I'd be glad to make another video on that as well. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and then subscribe to my channel if you like my content and you want to see more. And that's about it. Have a great day, guys.